Today I'll explain you the fourth chapter of History Class 9, Forest, Society and Colonialism. Forests play a major role in enhancing the quality of environment. Forests provide us numerous natural resources of economic and medicinal values. Due to growing population and rapid industrialization, world's forest areas are disappearing at a fast rate. In this chapter, we will study about disappearance of forest along with its cause and the issues related to it. First of all, I'll talk about deforestation. The disappearance of forest is referred to as deforestation, as you all know. The process of deforestation began many centuries ago in India. Under colonial rule, it became more systematic and extensive. Now let's see some causes of deforestation. Land for cultivation. As the population increased with time, the need for food increased. Thus, peasants increased the cultivation by clearing forest. In the process of commercialism of agriculture during colonial period, peasants were forced to expand cultivation area to cultivate commercial crops like jute, sugar, wheat and cotton. As a result, forests disappeared to a great extent and cultivation area rose by 6.7 hectares between 1880 and 1920. This point to be noted that forests disappeared to a great extent and cultivation area rose by 6.7 million hectares between 1880 and 1920. This was our first cause. The first cause was land for cultivation. Now the second cause, timber supply for Royal Navy. In 19th century, there was need for strong and durable timber supply for the Royal Navy ships in England. To maintain the timber supply for Royal Navy, search parties were sent to explore the forest resources of India. Lot of trees in India were cut within a decade and huge quantity of timber were exported to England. Okay, now the third cause for deforestation was expansion of railway network. From 1850s, the railway network expanded rapidly. Wood was a fuel to run rail engines, locomotives, and wooden sleepers were required to hold the track together. To fulfill these needs of railway, forests were cut at a large scale. So, next, our fourth cause for deforestation is enclosure of areas for plantations. Large areas of natural forests were also cleared to set up tea, coffee and rubber plantation to meet Europe's growing need for these commodities. The colonial government took over the forest and gave vast areas to European planters at cheap rates. The planters enclosed these areas, cleared forest and planted it with tea and coffee. Now I'll talk about the rise of commercial forestry. But before that, I'll recall all the four causes of deforestation. First is land for cultivation, second is timber supply for Royal Navy, third is expansion of railway network, and fourth is enclosure of areas for plantations. I have already explained four of them. Now I'll talk about the rise of commercial forestry. When the forests were being destroyed rapidly, the British government appointed a German expert, Dietrich Brandis, as the first Inspector General of Forest in India. He realized that a proper system was needed for the conservation of forests. Rules had to be framed to prevent felling of trees and restriction for grazing so that forests could be preserved for timber production. All these efforts of Brandis gave rise to Indian Forest Act 1865. Under this act, Dietrich Brandis set up the Indian Forest Service in 1864 and helped to formulate the Indian Forest Act of 1865. This point to be noted, Dietrich Brandis set up the Indian Forest Service in 1864 and helped to formulate the Indian Forest Act of 1865. He set up the Indian Forest Service in 1864 and he helped to formulate Indian Forest Act of 1865. The first Forest Research Institute, Imperial Forest Research Institute, was set up at Dehradun in 1906. Okay, this point also to be noted. The first Forest Research Institute, Imperial Forest Research Institute, this was the name of that institute, and this was set up at Dehradun in 1906. The institute taught the system of scientific forestry. In scientific forestry, natural forests which had lots of different types of trees were cut down and in their place one type of trees was planted in straight rows. This is called plantation. What's plantation? One type of trees was planted in straight rows. This system is called plantation. I'll repeat again. One type of trees was planted in straight rows and this system was known as plantation. For example, cultivation of polar trees which are good for timber. Forest officials surveyed the forest and planned how much of the plantation area was to be cut every year and replanted again. The Forest Act of 1865 was amended twice. The Forest Act, I'll repeat again, the Forest Act of 1865 was amended twice, one in 1878 and then in 1927. I'll repeat again so that you can remember this. The Forest Act of 1865 was amended twice, once in 1878 and then in 1927. No pastoralist was allowed access to forests which produce commercially valuable timber. The Indian Forest Act of 1878 divided forest into three categories: village reserve, for protected, and village forest. What were the three types of forest Indian Forest Act of 1878 divided? The three forests were village reserve forest, protected forest, and village forest. The best forests were called as reserve forests.